I was supporting my brother by sending him $5,000 every month, but on my birthday, he called me a freeloader and a leech who couldn't live without him. When I confronted him, my mother kicked me out, saying, "Get out, you garbage, and don't show your face again." I left, but a few days later, they showed up at my door on their knees, begging. I'm Madison, and living in my family feels like walking on a tightrope. One misstep, and everything comes crashing down. I share a house with my mother, my older brother Jack, and his wife, Mary. From the outside, we might seem like a picture-perfect family. But behind closed doors, it's a different story, one filled with tension, silent battles, and unspoken resentment. Jack is the golden child, the pride of our family. With his prestigious degree and high-paying job, he is the embodiment of success. My mother adores him, holding him up as the shining example of what a child should be. Mary, his ever-poised wife, plays her role flawlessly, always appearing supportive, always knowing the right thing to say. But beneath her polished surface, she only adds to the division in our household. And then there's me, the one who holds everything together, but is rarely acknowledged. I manage the household, keep track of the bills, and ensure my mother is comfortable. Yet, my efforts seem invisible. One day, my mother made a passing remark that cut deeper than she realized. "Living with Jack and Mary seems better for me," she said casually. In that moment, it was clear, no matter how much I contributed, emotionally or financially, I would always be the overlooked one. The one who did the work but never got the praise. The one who sacrificed but whose sacrifices were never recognized. But if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that strength comes from adversity. A life-altering change. During my second year of university, everything shifted. My father fell seriously ill, and our family was thrown into chaos. His condition required constant care, and it didn't take long to realize that my mother, who had never been the best at handling responsibilities, couldn't manage it on her own. We hired caregivers, but they could only do so much. The gaps in care were glaring, and someone had to step up. That someone was me. Between rushing to my lectures and racing back home, I found myself juggling two lives, one as a student trying to keep up with coursework and another as a caregiver ensuring my father's comfort. The weight of responsibility was suffocating, but I couldn't let him suffer. There were nights I barely slept trying to balance assignments with late-night check-ins on my father. I started skipping social events and study sessions, knowing that if I wasn't there, he might not get the care he needed. And then, a terrifying thought hit me. What would happen when I graduated? Once I started working, how would I continue to take care of him? The uncertainty loomed over me, like a storm cloud. Finding a way forward. Desperate for a solution, I began searching for alternatives. I delved into online business models, hoping to find a way to make money without being tied to a 10-to-6 job. My economics classes suddenly became more than just theory, they became tools for survival. I spent hours researching, testing different ideas, and learning everything I could about financial independence. At first, progress was slow. But with time, determination, and countless late nights, I started seeing results. For the first time in my life, I saw a glimpse of freedom, a path where I wasn't just the family's overlooked member, but someone capable of creating a future on my own terms. My story isn't just about struggles, it's about resilience. It's about finding strength when the world sees you as weak. And most of all, it's about proving that sometimes, the ones who are underestimated are the ones who rise the highest. A different path. I teamed up with some friends who knew a lot about business and technology. Together, we started a small online business. While most of my team worked from an office, I chose to work from home so I could stay close to my father. At first, things were slow, but over time, our business started growing. I was able to earn money and help with our household expenses. One day, as I was helping my father with his medicine, he looked at me with a warm smile. "Madison, you've sacrificed so much for this family," he said gently. "You've become a responsible and hard-working woman. I'm proud of you." His words touched my heart. It wasn't often that someone noticed my efforts, but hearing that from him made all the long nights and hard days feel worth it. Even though my life took a different path than I had planned, starting an online business allowed me to support my family in ways I never thought possible. It wasn't the future I imagined, but it became a journey of strength and growth. While others in my family didn't always see my efforts, my father's words reminded me that my sacrifices were not in vain. The golden son, my brother, Jack, has always been seen as the pride of our family. He was smart, determined, and went to a top university. He quickly got a high-paying job and my mother never missed a chance to praise him. While I stayed home, taking care of our father and building my business, Jack was out living his dream in the city. He became distant, barely answering calls or messages, as if we no longer existed. This was especially painful for my father, who had worked hard to support Jack through school, making sure he had everything he needed. But instead of being grateful, Jack just disappeared from our lives. When my father's health started getting worse, we needed all the support we could get, but Jack was nowhere to be found. Then, out of the blue, he called us. After years of silence, we were shocked. But he wasn't calling to check on us or to ask about our father. Instead, he asked for $120,000 as a wedding gift. His request was unbelievable. He had been gone for so long, ignoring us when we needed him most, yet now he wanted a huge sum of money. My mother, always blinded by her love for him, hesitated but didn't immediately say no. She still saw him as her perfect son, even though he had abandoned us when we needed him the most. A family divided. My mother defended Jack's request, saying it was a parent's duty to help their children start a new life. Her words made my father furious. He had been listening quietly, but now his voice trembled with anger and sadness. Why should we give him anything? My father asked. He abandoned us, never checked in, and now he expects us to pay for his wedding? The disappointment in his voice was clear. My father had always been proud of Jack's success, but this betrayal shattered that pride. My mother tried to argue, saying that helping Jack would bring the family closer. But my father wasn't convinced. Madison has been here every day, taking care of this family, while Jack disappeared without a word. And now he wants money? He doesn't deserve a single penny, he said firmly. His usual calm tone was now filled with hurt. The argument left the house tense. For the first time, my father openly acknowledged everything I had done for the family. Jack's selfishness had not only broken his trust but had also revealed how fragile our family had become. His actions left a deep scar that would never fully heal. A heartbreaking goodbye. My father's passing was sudden and devastating. One morning, I went to check on him, only to find him unresponsive. Panic rushed through me as I called an ambulance, but it was too late. He was gone. The man who had been my rock, my confidant, and the only one who truly saw my worth was no longer with us. The pain was unbearable, but I knew I had to stay strong. I had to give him a proper farewell. As the funeral arrangements began, I quickly realized I was on my own. My mother, who should have been taking charge, seemed distant. Instead of mourning, she sat on her phone, scrolling through social media as if nothing had happened. "You handle it, Madison. I'm too overwhelmed," she said casually. Her indifference hurt, but I pushed forward, determined to honor my father's memory. On the day of the funeral, an unwelcome surprise arrived. Jack and his wife, Mary. They walked in like they were attending a party instead of a funeral. Jack strolled around casually, drawing attention for all the wrong reasons. Mary, dressed in flashy clothes, wore a smug expression that made people uncomfortable. While others had come to pay their respects, Jack acted as if he had done nothing wrong. But the worst part? My mother welcomed him with a warm smile, as if nothing had happened. Her ability to ignore his betrayal, even on the day of my father's funeral, was something I would never understand. A family's true colors. "I'm glad you're here, Jack," my mother said, her voice unusually cheerful given the situation. Then, to my shock, she added, "Now we can discuss your father's inheritance." The mood in the room shifted instantly. Guests who had come to mourn were now witnessing a family argument unfold right in front of them. Jack, never one to miss an opportunity, spoke up loudly. "Honestly, I don't think Madison should expect anything. She's been living off Dad all this time." His words were filled with sarcasm, and I could feel the weight of everyone's stares on me. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay quiet. This was supposed to be a day to honor my father, not a battleground for greed. My mother, completely ignoring how inappropriate this conversation was, added, "Your father's money belongs to the family, and as his eldest son, Jack deserves the most." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father had worked his whole life to provide for us, and now his legacy was being reduced to nothing but a fight over money. I glanced at the guests. Some looked away awkwardly, while others whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what was happening. Jack, feeling bold with my mother's support, turned to me. "You've been a burden, Madison. It's only fair that I get what's rightfully mine." Mary, standing beside him, nodded with a smug smirk. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion," I said firmly. "We are here to honor Dad, not argue over inheritance." Jack scoffed but didn't push further. My mother, however, looked annoyed, as if I had ruined her moment. After a few more tense seconds, Jack leaned toward my mother and whispered something. Then, without a word of respect for my father's memory, he, Mary, and my mother left the funeral early, leaving me alone to handle everything they had so carelessly disrupted. As I stood by my father's casket, a mix of emotions ran through me. Deep sorrow for losing the one person who truly cared for me and burning anger at the selfishness that had tainted his final farewell. It was clear that my family was beyond repair, and I was left to pick up the pieces alone. But if there was one thing my father had taught me, It was resilience. No matter how broken things seemed, I would move forward. I would honor his memory by building a life on my own terms, no matter how difficult the road ahead. A battle over what's left. The inheritance fight didn't end there. After the funeral, Jack made his claim loud and clear. "This house belongs to me," he declared, standing in the living room like he already owned it. A battle over the house. Jack stood in the middle of the living room like he already owned the place. "As Dad's eldest son, it's my birthright," he declared, his voice full of confidence. Beside him, Mary nodded in agreement, wearing her usual smug expression. My mother sat on the couch, saying nothing. Her silence said more than words ever could. She wasn't going to stop him. I took a deep breath, holding back my anger. For years, I had been the one keeping this household together. I had cared for my father when no one else would. I had paid the bills, handled the responsibilities, and made sure our home stayed running. And yet, here was Jack, gone for years, suddenly demanding what he thought he was owed. His entitlement would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. "Jack," I said, my voice calm but firm, "this house doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to Mom either. Legally, it's mine." The room fell silent. Jack's confident smirk vanished, and even Mary looked momentarily shocked. "What are you talking about?" Jack finally asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I'm talking about the fact that Dad transferred this house to me before he passed," I replied, standing my ground. "He put it in my name because he knew I was the one taking care of him and supporting this family." Jack's face turned red with anger. "That's impossible," he shouted. "Why would he do that? You don't even have a real job. You've just been freeloading here." My hands trembled, but I refused to let him get to me. "Freeloading?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea how much money I've put into this house while you were off living your life in the city? While you ignored us, I was here, taking care of Dad, paying the bills, keeping this house running." I glanced at my mother, hoping, just once, that she would defend me, that she would acknowledge what I had done, but she wouldn't even meet my eyes. Her silence stung more than Jack's words ever could. I steadied myself and continued. "In case you forgot," I said, my voice unwavering, "Dad's savings ran out long ago, mostly because of Mom's spending. After that, I stepped in. I've been giving $5,000 every month to support this household. Dad knew I was the only one who could be relied on. That's why he made sure this house would stay in my name." As I spoke, memories flooded my mind. I remember the day my father told me about the transfer. His voice was weak, but his words were full of certainty. "Madison," he had said, "I want to make sure you're secure. You've done so much for this family, and I trust you to do what's right." His words had given me strength then and they gave me strength now. But Jack wasn't ready to back down. "This isn't fair," he shouted. "I'm the eldest son. I deserve this house. What kind of family betrays their own blood like this?" A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Betrayal?" I repeated, shaking my head, breaking free. I looked straight at Jack. "You abandoned us for years," I said. "You didn't even check on Dad when he was sick. The only betrayal here is you showing up now, thinking you can take what isn't yours." Mary, clearly uncomfortable, tugged at Jack's arm and whispered something I couldn't hear. Finally, my mother spoke in a low, hesitant voice. "Madison, maybe we should share the house. It's what your father would have wanted." I shook my head firmly. "No, Mom. Dad left this house to me because he trusted me. You and Jack have only shown selfishness, and I won't let you take advantage of me anymore." Their betrayal only made my decision clearer. This house wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of my father's trust and my years of sacrifice. I wasn't about to let it fall into the hands of people who only remembered family when it suited them. For the first time in years, I felt free. Strong, ready to take control of my own life. A final decision. After years of giving, sacrificing, and receiving nothing in return, I finally made the decision that would change everything. I was leaving. Standing in the living room, surrounded by people who had taken me for granted, I faced my mother, Jack, and Mary. Their faces were a mix of shock and disbelief as I spoke. "I've had enough," I said firmly. "I've supported this family for years, and all I've received in return is disrespect and betrayal. I'm done. I'm leaving this house, and I'm cutting all ties with you." Jack scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Where will you even go, Madison? You've always been stuck here, playing the martyr." I met his gaze without hesitation. "That's where you're wrong," I said. "I've been planning this for a long time. I'm selling the house and moving abroad. I have no reason to stay here, surrounded by people who only see me as a burden." My mother's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't sell this house. It's been in our family for years." I shook my head. "It hasn't been our house for a long time," I replied coldly. "It became mine when Dad transferred ownership to me. He trusted me to take care of it, and now I'm making the decision to let it go." The room fell silent. Jack and Mary exchanged nervous glances, while my mother looked like she wanted to argue, but she had no words left. That evening, I began packing my things. As I folded clothes and boxed up memories, a wave of emotions hit me. I thought about all the nights I had stayed up late, balancing my studies while taking care of my father, only to be met with indifference. But now, it didn't matter. I was finally choosing myself, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. A new beginning. I thought about my father's words, the few moments of encouragement that had kept me going. Then, I remembered all the times my mother and Jack had taken me for granted. Their selfishness had hurt me deeply, year after year. But as much as the bitterness lingered, something else was growing inside me. Relief. By leaving, I was taking back my life. A life that had been overshadowed by their expectations and demands. For the first time, I felt a spark of hope. A future that was mine to shape. I finalized the sale of the house through my uncle, the one family member who had always quietly supported me. He understood why I was leaving and promised to handle everything. Once the sale was complete, I booked a one-way ticket to a tropical place I had always dreamed of visiting. This was my chance to start over, far from the toxic environment I had endured for so long. As I locked the door for the last time, I felt a strange mix of sadness and freedom. This house had been both my burden and my strength, but it no longer defined me. Walking away, I wasn't just leaving behind a house, I was leaving behind a family that had never truly valued me. This was my fresh start, and I was ready for it. A new life by the ocean. With the weight of my old life behind me, I boarded the plane. The moment I arrived, I was greeted by warm sunshine, a soft ocean breeze, and endless blue skies. It felt like stepping into a new world, one filled with possibilities. The first few weeks were an adjustment. I rented a small apartment near the beach, with big windows that let in the sound of the waves. My morning started with fresh fruit and coffee on the balcony, watching the sunrise over the ocean. It was nothing like the tense, suffocating home I had left behind. Here, I felt peace, something I hadn't known in years. I slowly settled into a routine. My days were spent working on my online business, which gave me the freedom to live on my own terms. Afternoons were for exploring, wandering through colorful markets, trying exotic foods, and meeting people from all walks of life. The locals were kind and welcoming, their laid-back way of living teaching me an important lesson. Life isn't meant to be rushed. It's meant to be enjoyed. One evening, as I walked along the shoreline, the setting sun painted the water in golden hues. I stood still, taking in the beauty around me, and let my mind drift back to everything I had been through. The pain of my past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled me. I had learned important lessons. Lessons about strength, self-worth, and the power of setting boundaries. For years, I had lived for others. Now, I was finally living for myself. A life of my own. I had given up my dreams to support a family that never truly appreciated me. But those sacrifices had made me strong. They had shaped me into someone who could stand on her own. My father's trust in me had been a small flicker of light in the darkness, but it changed everything. It reminded me that I was worth more than how they had treated me. His belief in me gave me the courage to finally break free. Now, I was embracing my independence, building a life where I was in control. The struggles I had faced taught me something important. I deserved to be happy. I learned to put myself first, and surround myself with people who truly respected and valued me. For the first time, the future didn't scare me. It excited me. Standing on the beach, watching the waves roll onto the shore, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I was grateful. Grateful for the strength I had found. Grateful for the opportunities ahead. Grateful for this beautiful new chapter in my life. Life had tested me in ways I never imagined, but I had come out stronger. This was my fresh start, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. Their downfall back in my old life, my family's collapse was inevitable. Jack, Mary, and my mother had always lived beyond their means. Without me quietly covering their expenses, their reckless choices finally caught up with them. I didn't keep in touch, but my uncle, who had always been a quiet observer, occasionally shared updates. It didn't take long for their lavish lifestyle to fall apart under the weight of their growing debts. Jack and Mary, once so confident and proud, were evicted from their home after I sold the house. They ended up in a small, cramped apartment in the city, struggling to make ends meet. Their savings drained quickly, and they had to take part-time jobs just to pay for basic needs. Meanwhile, my mother, who had once enjoyed endless shopping trips and expensive outings, found herself forced to live frugally. The debt collectors came knocking, their calls growing more frequent and aggressive. The life they had built on illusion and entitlement was crumbling. Desperate to stay afloat, they borrowed money from risky lenders, but that only made things worse. Every bad decision dragged them deeper into a financial hole. Their once close relationships turned into bitter fights as they blamed each other for their situation. The proud family that once dismissed me, the one that made me feel invisible, was now barely holding itself together. Moving forward, as for me, I felt nothing for them anymore. I had no desire to go back, no urge to save them. My uncle would sometimes call, his voice filled with quiet disappointment at their choices, but I never asked too many questions. Their struggles were finding peace. I often thought about the irony of it all. The same people who had mocked me for staying home and working quietly were now struggling to survive, but I didn't feel joy in their downfall. It wasn't about revenge. Instead, I felt a bittersweet sense of closure. For years, I had offered them my help, only to be met with coldness and betrayal. Now, they were facing the consequences of their choices, while I was finally free, living a life filled with peace and purpose. Walking along the shoreline of my new home, feeling the warm sand beneath my feet, I realized something important. I had no regrets. My journey had been full of struggles, but it had led me to strength and independence. My family's downfall was their own doing, and for the first time in my life, I was truly at peace, focused on my own happiness and the brighter days ahead.